Emma's phone buzzed. The message glared back at her from the screen, an unknown number with a chilling message. It claimed she left her wallet at the diner.
My wallet? It's still in my purse. This is a lie. But whose lie?
Her heart pounded against her ribs. She thought of Derek, her new boyfriend.
Could it be him? Was this some twisted game?
Her fingers trembled as she typed a response.
Who is this?
Silence, no response. She paced the room, each step doing little to quell the rising panic. The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage.
Maybe it was a wrong number, a cruel prank.
But deep down, a chilling certainty settled in her gut. This was no mistake. Someone was watching her. Emma's gaze darted to the window. Derek's car was gone. The street was empty, a canvas of shadows and flickering streetlights. Her breath hitched in her throat.
I need to get away from the window.
She retreated deeper into her apartment. The TV flickered to life, but it did little to drown out the fear. Her senses were on high alert. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Derek's name.
Should I call him? Could I even trust him?
The phone buzzed again.
I'm outside.
Panic seized her. She rushed to the window. The street was still empty, but she knew better. He was out there. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsily punching in the emergency number.
911, what's your emergency?
The dispatcher's voice unleashed a torrent of fear within her. She explained about the messages, the unknown number, the terrifying feeling of being watched.
An officer is on their way, ma'am. Can you tell me your address?
Emma rattled off her address. She retreated to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block. Minutes crawled by, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to her nerves. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every sound a potential threat. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of her own heart. She clutched the knife tightly, her knuckles turning white. Headlights sliced through the darkness outside. A wave of relief washed over her. Her phone buzzed with another message.
You shouldn't have called the police.
Her blood ran cold. They were watching her. She showed the message to the officer.
Stay inside, lock the doors, and don't open up for anyone but me.
She nodded, fear constricting her throat. The officer moved with a practiced efficiency, checking the perimeter. Emma watched from the window, her breath catching in her throat with every passing shadow. The silence was shattered by the incessant buzzing of her phone.
They can't protect you.
Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She was trapped, surrounded by invisible predators.
No, I haven't. I don't know who it could be.
Emma shook her head, her mind a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. The officer's words offered little comfort.
Don't turn around.
Her phone buzzed again. The words, cold and menacing, sent a chill down her spine. Before she could react, a deafening crash shattered the night. Glass exploded inwards, showering the room with shards.
Get down.
The officer reacted instantly, pushing her aside. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening. The officer lay sprawled on the floor, his chest stained crimson. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Her mind raced, searching for an escape route. The apartment was now a death trap. She scrambled to her feet, her legs shaky. Slipping past the body of the officer, she made a dash for the back door. Fumbling with the lock, she threw the door open and plunged into the cool night air. She could hear the footsteps now, heavy and deliberate. She raced through the maze of backyards, her lungs burning. Fences loomed in the darkness, obstacles in her desperate flight. Each ragged breath was a desperate prayer for escape. Her phone buzzed again. It was Derek.
Emma, where are you? What's going on?
Derek, help me. He's here. He's trying to kill me.
His voice, panicked and filled with concern, was a lifeline.
Stay on the line, Emma. Where are you? I'm almost there.
She described her location, her voice trembling.
Please hurry, Derek. He's right behind me.
She risked a glance over her shoulder. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness.
I see you, Emma.
Terror clawed at her throat. She was trapped, cornered like an animal.
Emma!
Derek's voice was a beacon of hope. The figure emerged from the shadows, blocking the alley's entrance. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers.
Get away from her!
Derek's voice, filled with rage, cut through the silence. The man turned his head, acknowledging Derek's presence. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He took a step towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. Headlights sliced through the darkness. Derek's car screeched to a halt.
Get in the car, Emma.
She scrambled towards the car. Derek shoved her into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. He hit the gas, speeding away from the alleyway. The road ahead was unfamiliar, winding through a dark stretch of woods. Tree branches scraped against the car, sending shivers down her spine. They had driven for what felt like hours when the car screeched to a halt, a dead end. Before either of them could react, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, blindingly bright in the darkness. A car, its engine idling, blocked their escape. They were caught. Derek's hand shot out, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into her skin.
Stay here.
He hissed, his voice low and urgent. He reached under his seat, his movements swift and practiced, and pulled out a gun. Emma's breath caught in her throat.
Derek, no, don't do this.
She whispered, her voice trembling. He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, love, resignation.
I have to. He won't stop, not until one of us is dead.
Before she could protest further, he was out of the car, slamming the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, a solitary figure silhouetted against the headlights of the other car, then raised the gun. The sound of a gunshot shattered the night, echoing through the trees. Emma screamed, her voice raw with terror and despair, but the gunshot hadn't come from Derek's gun. Her eyes darted to the other car. The driver's side door swung open and a figure emerged. It was him. He stood there for a moment, his face illuminated by the car's headlights, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. In his hand he held a gun, smoke curled from the barrel. Derek lay at his feet, his body still, his eyes staring vacantly at the night sky. He was gone, and the man who had taken his life was walking towards her, his eyes cold and calculating, his smile predatory. Her breath hitched, a strangled gasp lost in the night. Time seemed to stop. The world shrunk to the confines of the car, the smell of fear, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of blood filling her senses. The man, the monster, advanced. Every step he took towards the car was a hammer blow to her heart. His eyes, cold and triumphant, met hers through the windshield. A cruel parody of a smile played on his lips. He radiated a chilling aura of power, of victory, that stole the air from her lungs. He reached the car, his hand still holding the gun, resting on the door handle. His touch seemed to burn through the metal, sending a jolt of pure terror through her. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, a sob escaping her lips. She couldn't watch, she couldn't bear to see the look on his face as he finished what he started. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but sit there and wait for the inevitable, but her body refused to obey. She was paralyzed, a prisoner in her own terror. The door handle rattled.
Whispers. Please, no.
She braced herself, waiting for the final, terrifying encounter. Just as the door handle began to give way, a sound pierced the night, a distant wail, growing louder by the second. Sirens. The man froze, his head snapping up, his entire body radiating a tense alertness. He glanced from the approaching sirens to Emma, a flicker of indecision crossing his features. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met. His were filled with a cold fury, a promise of unfinished business. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he turned and melted into the darkness. He disappeared into the woods as quickly as he had emerged, swallowed by the shadows and the night. The sirens grew louder, closer, their shrill cries, a symphony of hope cutting through the terror that had gripped her. The flashing lights of police cars sliced through the darkness, casting an eerie glow on the scene. They had come, but it was too late.
Whispers. Thank God.
The police descended upon the scene, their movements urgent and practiced. A flurry of activity, of shouted commands and flashing lights, replaced the terrifying silence that had descended after the killer's escape. They were everywhere, searching, investigating, but their presence brought her little comfort. He was gone, vanished into thin air. Emma sat huddled in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket that did little to chase away the chill that had seeped into her bones. She watched as paramedics swarmed Derek's body, their movements a grim ballet of futility. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold skin, but she couldn't make a sound. The enormity of what had happened, the sheer terror of it all, had stolen her voice. She was surrounded by people, by the police and paramedics, yet she had never felt so utterly alone. The world around her seemed to move in slow motion, the sounds muffled and distant, as if she were trapped in a bubble, separate from the reality unfolding before her. And in that moment she realized the nightmare was far from over.
They led her away from the scene, her hand held gently by a female officer whose words of comfort seemed to come from a distant world.
She answered their questions in a daze, her voice a monotone, her mind struggling to make sense of the fragments of the nightmare that replayed in her mind.
Images flashed before her eyes, the chilling message on her phone.
Each image was a searing brand against her soul, a reminder of the terror she had endured, of the man she had lost.
Derek!
He had sacrificed himself for her. He had given his life to save hers, and the weight of that realization pressed down on her with crushing force.
Guilt warred with grief, a toxic cocktail that threatened to consume her.
She was safe now, that's what they kept telling her. But the word felt hollow, devoid of meaning. The terror that had seeped into her bones refused to be so easily dismissed.
As I sat in the back of the police car, staring out at the city lights that blurred into streaks of color, a chilling thought took root in my mind, burrowing deep like a parasite. The killer hadn't come for Derek, he had come for me. He had known where to find me, had lured me to that deserted road. Derek had just been a pawn in his twisted game, an obstacle to be removed, and now that he knew who I was, where to find me, he would be back. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was a target, marked by a predator who had tasted blood and wanted more. The police might offer me protection, but could they really keep me safe? Could they shield me from a monster who lurked in the shadows, who moved with an unsettling grace and seemed to vanish into thin air? I had survived the night, but the terror was far from over. It lived inside me now, a dark passenger that whispered doubts and fears in the silence of my mind. I was a survivor, yes, but also a prisoner, trapped in a perpetual state of fear, forever looking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment the nightmare would begin again.
The police station, a sterile and brightly lit space, offered no solace. The constant hum of fluorescent lights grated on her nerves, each flicker amplifying the feeling of unreality that clung to her like a shroud. She answered their questions mechanically, her voice a hollow echo of the terror that churned within her, but the words felt empty, meaningless in the face of the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her.
Derek. His name was a silent scream in my heart. He was gone, ripped from my life by a darkness I barely understood. And for what? To save me. The weight of that sacrifice, of his love, pressed down on me with crushing finality. I should have fought harder, run faster, done something, anything to change the outcome. But I had frozen, paralyzed by fear, and now he was gone.
The police assured her that she had done everything right, that there was nothing more she could have done. But their words rang hollow in the face of her overwhelming guilt. She was alive, he was dead, and the terrifying truth was that he had died protecting her, a shield against a darkness that had singled her out, marked her as its own. The days that followed were a blur of condolences, funeral arrangements, and sleepless nights haunted by gruesome images that refused to be banished. The world around her seemed to continue as if nothing had changed, the sun rising and setting with cruel indifference to the darkness that had shattered her life. But for Emma, there was no going back. The terror that had stalked her that night, the chilling realization that she had been the intended target, had irrevocably altered the landscape of her life. She was a stranger in her own skin, haunted by a fear that clung to her like a shadow, whispering doubts and suspicions in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts.
I found myself questioning everything, everyone. Every unfamiliar face on the street, every unexpected noise, every unanswered phone call sent a jolt of fear through my system. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving me teetering on the precipice of paranoia.
The police were doing their job, investigating the case, searching for the killer, but their reassurances offered little comfort. They couldn't be everywhere, couldn't protect her from a threat that seemed to move with the fluidity of a nightmare, a phantom that could materialize and vanish at will.
I tried to piece together the fragments of that night, searching for an answer, a reason, anything that could make sense of the senseless. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the terrifying truth. There was no logic to evil, no reason to madness. Sometimes the monsters were real and sometimes they chose you. The world felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that evil lurked just beneath the surface, a constant threat waiting to reclaim me. The city streets, once familiar and comforting, now seemed menacing. Every shadow a potential hiding place, every stranger a possible threat. I had escaped from the killer that night, but there was no escaping the terror that he had unleashed within me. It was a constant companion, a dark passenger whispering doubts and fears in the silence of my mind. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent my heart racing, my body bracing for an attack that might never come. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The price of my survival was a life sentence of fear, a perpetual state of hypervigilance, a constant reminder that the monster was still out there, somewhere, waiting for the moment to claim me. And the most terrifying realization of all was that there was nowhere to run, no place to hide, because the true prison was not the one I had escaped, but the one that now existed within my own mind.